So to start us off today, I want you to imagine that you're an art appraiser, you know?
Okay, I'm with you.
Someone walks right into your office and brings you this priceless, just entirely unique painting. I mean, it's a masterpiece that no one has ever seen before, completely original composition.
Right. A total one of a kind.
Exactly. But instead of looking at the brushstrokes or, the use of color or even what the painting actually evokes, you just pull out a tape measure. You look at the edges and you ask, well, how much is the frame going to cost us?
Oh, wow. That's a bleak way to look at art.
It really is. But welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you are here with us today because our mission today is to take a microscopic look at a really profound and honestly pretty chilling piece of writing by Dr. Jaime Hoerricks. It's titled Priced Out of Personhood, Opening the Machine.
Yeah, and it's such a heavy, necessary read.
It is. We are going to explore how society, specifically what Dr. Hoerricks calls the market, views and evaluates autistic life. Like whether you have a personal connection to autism or you just like studying systemic structures, this is going to completely shift how you hear everyday words. So to unpack that opening thesis, what does she actually mean when she says that before autism is understood, it's priced?
Well, the real tragedy of that tape measure in your analogy is that the appraiser walks away genuinely believing they understand the art.
Well, right, because they got the dimensions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Simply because they've calculated its dimensions and its cost, they think they get it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the exact error Dr. Hoerricks is pointing out in our societal architecture. The market, and by that we mean not just Wall Street, but our broader systems of education, healthcare, the whole economy. It looks at autistic life and immediately starts sorting it.
Sorting it into, like, what's profitable and what's going to cost us.
Yes. Profitable or costly framings. And the critical, just devastating mistake is that society views its ability to sort these individuals as actual understanding. I mean, pricing someone is not the same as understanding them.
No, not at all.
Calculating a cost margin is the exact opposite of seeing a human being.
Which sets the stage perfectly for this really specific moment the text focuses on. Dr. Hoerricks writes, let me find the quote, here it is. There is a moment early in so many autistic stories when the person disappears and the projection arrives.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really heavy realization when you actually sit with the mechanics of how that happens in real time.
Right.
The human being is essentially just erased and replaced by a financial forecast. The text outlines that the market typically sorts an artistic life into one of three specific categories: a burden, an optimization target, or a conditional asset.
Let's dig into how those categories actually operate on the ground because, reducing a life to those terms, it implies a complete loss of agency. So if someone is categorized as a burden, what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it looks like a cold assessment of pure return on investment. I mean, when the machine of the market evaluates an individual as a burden, it's basically running a lifelong calculation.
Like a literal ledger of their life.
Pretty much. It's tallying up the projected decades of specialized housing, state assistance, medical care, and it's weighing all of that against the expected economic output of that person as a quote-unquote traditional worker.
Wow.
And when the system decides the math just doesn't look good, it basically writes the individual off as a net economic loss. The person's intrinsic worth is completely overshadowed by their projected lifetime cost.
Which I guess naturally leads into that second category, the optimization target.
Right.
Like if a person isn't written off as a complete loss, they become a project.
Yes, exactly. A project to be managed.
The system looks at them and asks, well, how much can be changed? How much can be managed? It treats the autistic individual like, I don't know, a piece of broken machinery that just needs enough capital investment to be fixed.
Right, optimized.
Yeah, optimized, so they can eventually be placed back onto the standard assembly line of the economy.
And the really sad part is the goal in that scenario has absolutely nothing to do with helping the person thrive as their authentic self.
It's just about getting them on the belt.
Exactly. The therapies, the interventions, the intense behavioral modifications under the market's gaze, these are just investments. They're designed to mold the person into a compliant, productive participant in the standard economy.
So their unique traits are basically viewed as obstacles to their future profitability?
Yeah, that's it, exactly.
I mean, I understand the brutal logic of viewing someone as a burden or a project, but that third category, the conditional asset, that one feels especially insidious to me because it really masquerades as acceptance.
Oh, it absolutely does. It happens when the market finds a specific way to extract value from an autistic individual's traits. You see this heavily in certain corporate hiring initiatives, especially in the tech sector, right?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
A company might actively recruit neurodivergent individuals because they want to harness a person's intense capacity for focus or, their exceptional pattern recognition.
But the value is strictly conditional.
Right.
It's a company essentially saying, hey, you're a highly valued asset to us, but only as long as you perform the specific, highly technical function. And honestly, more importantly, only as long as your differences don't become inconvenient.
Yes, the inconvenience factor is huge there.
Think of a tech company like bragging about their neurodivergent coders, but the very moment one of those coders requests a sensory-friendly workspace or maybe a non-standard communication method, suddenly they're a problem.
Right, because the math flipped. The moment the cost of the accommodation outweighs the extraction value of their work, that asset status is just revoked.
But, okay, I gotta push back here for a second. I struggle a bit with the cynicism of this whole framework. I really do.
Okay, wait on me.
Because when we talk about this happening early in so many autistic stories, we're usually talking about toddlers, right? Young kids.
Yeah, usually very early on.
If a pediatrician flags a milestone delay and suggests early intervention, or a parent spends, hours fighting to get their kid into speech therapy, that comes from a place of deep love and concern. They want the child to thrive. To call that a market projection or an optimization target, it kind of feels like we're projecting malicious intent onto people who are genuinely just trying to provide care.
That is such a vital distinction, and honestly, it is the exact crux of how systemic bias operates.
Okay.
Because Dr. Hoerricks is not describing a conspiracy of malicious individuals.
Yeah.
The pediatrician, the parents, the teachers, they absolutely operate from a place of love and care.
Right. They're doing their best.
But they are forced to operate within a system that does not deal in love. It deals in resources.
Right.
The stealthy nature of this system is that it uses the actual mechanisms of support to execute the calculations of the market.
I see.
I mean, the market doesn't walk into the pediatrician's office wearing a banker's suit and holding a calculator. It arrives disguised as care.
So the spreadsheet is invisible, but it still completely dictates the interaction.
Exactly. Think about the actual mechanics of getting help for a child. A doctor cannot simply say, hey, this child needs a different environment to learn.
They need codes, right? Insurance codes.
Yes. To unlock state funding, or to get an insurance company to pay for therapy, or secure an aide in a classroom, the doctor and the parents are forced to submit to the market's terms. They have to prove a deficit.
Ah, I see what you mean.
They have to diagnose the child with a specific severity level to justify the expenditure of resources. So these individuals deeply care about the child, but the structure literally forces them to answer economic questions and use market-driven vocabulary before they are allowed to provide that care.
And that vocabulary is precisely where the disguise becomes visible, doesn't it? The text points out how the system uses what Dr. Hoerricks calls soft language.
Soft language.
Words that sound gentle or compassionate, but they actually serve as camouflage for the machine's financial calculations.
The text highlights a few very specific words that are just ubiquitous in these early stories. Concern, delay, support needs, future planning.
Right. Like, on the surface, a school administrator sitting across from a parent and saying, well, we have a concern about a delay, so let's discuss support needs and future planning. It sounds incredibly empathetic.
It sounds like they're totally on your side.
But the text asks us to contrast those gentle words with the harsh, unspoken questions that the institution is actually asking underneath all of that. Like when the system says concern, the real question being asked is, what will this cost?
Yep. And when the system uses the word delay, the underlying calculation is, well, how difficult is this going to be?
Because delay implies a schedule.
Exactly. It implies that there's a strict schedule, a set timetable of human development, and this child is falling behind.
Whoa.
And the market hates a delay because waiting costs money.
Wow. And then when they talk about support needs, they're really asking how much can be changed. It's that optimization target all over again. Like, how much of this child's natural state can we alter? Then you have future planning, which is really just a softer, more palatable way of asking how much can be managed.
And notice the glaring omission in every single one of those underlying questions.
Yeah.
In all the endless forms, the assessments, the IEP meetings, the system rarely pauses to ask the only question that actually matters, which is, who is this child?
What kind of life is trying to take shape here?
Exactly.
That human reality is just completely buried under the paperwork. It reminds me, honestly, it functions exactly like corporate HR speak.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
Right, like when a human resources department says they are implementing a strategic realignment to foster synergy and promote dynamic transition opportunities.
Yeah, they use all this soft, progressive-sounding language.
But what they're actually doing is laying people off to protect their profit margins. The vocabulary creates a necessary buffer between the harsh reality of the economics and the actual human beings whose lives are being disrupted.
And in the context of autism and neurodiversity, that vocabulary creates a buffer between the humanity of the child and the institutional reality that we have fundamentally industrialized human development.
Industrialized human development. That is a heavy phrase.
It is. The market conditions us to view variance as a deficit because deficits can be managed. They can be built, tracked, optimized. A unique human existence cannot be put on a spreadsheet,
No, it can't.
but a quote-unquote delay requiring management certainly can be.
That phrase, industrialized human development, it pulls us right into the core philosophical friction of the text. We've sort of looked at how the market speaks about autism, but to understand why the market behaves this way, we have to look at the dichotomy Dr. Hoerricks sets up between a variance and a way of being.
Right, the text states it very clearly. Let me quote it. Because the market rarely meets autism as a way of being. It meets it as a variance from expectation.
The distinction between those two concepts is everything. I mean, a way of being implies inherent validity.
Right.
Right? It just is. If something is a way of being, its existence is natural, it's complete, and it's just as valid as any other existence. It doesn't need to be justified. But a variance that implies a deviation from a standard.
It means you were supposed to be one thing, you veered off course, and now you are an error that needs to be corrected.
And in a society driven by market efficiency, an error or a variance is a literal problem.
It is. And Dr. Hoerricks points out the specific systemic frictions that occur when a valid way of being is treated merely as a variance. She describes it as a disruption in the timetable, a pressure on the classroom, and a demand on the family.
Disruption in the timetable, that really makes me think of like a factory assembly line.
Yeah. Tell me more about that.
Well, society is basically built like a massive, highly calibrated conveyor belt, right? Designed to produce one specific type of product at a very specific speed. You get on the belt at kindergarten. You're expected to read by a certain age, sit still for 8 hours a day by another age, move to middle school, high school, and then seamlessly transition into the workforce. The entire economic structure relies on the predictability of that belt.
Oh, totally. It's a machine built on incredibly rigid expectations.
Right. And if there is any variance on that belt, like if a part requires a slightly different shape or it takes a little longer to dry or needs a different environment to set properly, the belt has to slow down.
Right.
And in a factory, slowing down the belt costs time and money. The factory manager is terrified of variance. But human beings are not products.
No, they're not. Yet the ultimate fear of the market, as defined by Dr. Hoerricks, is exactly the fear of that factory manager.
Wow.
The system looks at an autistic life and is just terrified of a future that may require more time, more labor, more accommodation, and more money than it had hoped to spend. It all comes back to the budget.
Always the budget.
The market operates on the assumption of a standardized human, because a standardized human is cheap to process.
Cheap to process. You know, I want you, the listener, to really think about this in the context of your own life, even if you don't have a personal connection to autism. Like, how often do you feel like you're being judged, not for your inherent way of being, but for how much you disrupt a preset timetable?
That's a great question to ask.
How often do you feel like society only extends value to you when you are moving at the expected speed, producing at the expected volume? And the moment you need more time or a different kind of support, I mean, maybe you get sick, maybe you experience burnout, maybe you just learn differently, you suddenly shift from being a person to being a pressure or demand.
It's a completely universal vulnerability that this text exposes, even though it focuses specifically on the autistic experience.
Right.
When the system is built entirely on a rigid timetable, it forces anyone who needs different accommodations or simply just more time to financially justify their existence.
You literally have to prove your worth.
You have to prove that the cost of your accommodation will eventually yield a return on investment. And if you can't prove that your variance will eventually be profitable, the system begins to strip away your agency. Your worth is no longer intrinsic. It becomes conditional.
Which is the profound reality of the title.
Exactly. You are quite literally priced out of personhood.
Your personhood becomes contingent on your profitability. It's such a devastating lens to look through. So as we sort of synthesize the journey we've taken through Dr. Hoerricks' writing today, we started by identifying that invisible, quiet moment where the actual human being disappears and they're replaced by a financial projection.
We looked at how the machine sorts lives into categories, right? Burden, optimization target, or conditional asset.
And then we unmasked the camouflage of that soft language, revealing how words like concern and delay are really often just institutional politeness hiding the harsh calculations of cost and management.
Yeah, and we explored the core philosophical conflict. A market that views neurodiversity not as a valid human way of being, but as a costly, inefficient variance to its rigid factory timetable.
We promised an aha moment at the beginning of this deep dive. And honestly, for me, it's how this concept of pricing permanently changes the way we should listen to the world around us.
It demands an entirely new level of critical listening. I mean, the next time you are sitting in a school meeting, reviewing an educational plan, or watching a news segment about healthcare funding, or even just reading a new corporate HR policy regarding employee wellness, listen for the machine.
Listen for the moments when a human being is being evaluated not for who they are, but for how much they vary from the expected cost. Look for the tape measure.
Look for the tape measure. I love that.
It completely shifts your perspective on what is actually being prioritized in those rooms.
And it forces us to ask better questions. Instead of asking how we can manage a variance to keep the conveyor belt moving, we need to ask how we can dismantle the belt entirely to make room for different ways of being.
Absolutely. Before we sign off today, I want to leave you with one final thought. Just something to mull over as you go about the rest of your day that builds on the reality of this machine, but maybe pushes it into a slightly different conceptual space.
Okay, let's hear it.
If our society's default mechanism is to strip away personhood from anyone who requires more time, labor, or money than the market hoped to spend, what happens when the definition of a normal expectation becomes narrower and narrower?
Oh, wow. That is the terrifying trajectory of hyper-efficiency, isn't it?
Exactly. In a world utterly obsessed with maximum optimization and doing more with less, the margins for what is considered an acceptable cost are constantly shrinking.
Right, the belt gets faster and faster.
What happens when the definition of the standardized, cheap-to-process human becomes so incredibly narrow that almost all of us become a costly variance?
We all eventually fall off the belt.
Are we all just one disruption, one illness, one delay away from being priced out of our own personhood?
That is a chilling thought.
It is. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. You are now better equipped to hear the real questions lurking beneath the soft language of the market.
And maybe, armed with that awareness, you can be the one in the room who insists on asking the human questions instead.
Remember the art appraiser. Don't let society just price the frame. Demand that they look at the painting. Take care, everyone.